huge thanks for making time for me and for spending a little time with the book. It's so wonderful to see you, Asha, and appreciate everything you're doing for the literary community and with the podcast and the journal. My name is Justin Hocking. I'm an essayist, a memoirist, a writer of short stories, and I teach creative writing at Portland State University. And my most recent book is a field guide to the Subterranean, a memoir, which came out on June 10th of 2025 this year. So yeah, it's just fresh off the press.
I was really excited one that you have another memoir out, but also just like I feel like the trend that was so popular for a while of combining different kinds of writing in memoir has kind of gone away. Like I haven't seen it as much over the
Mm-hmm.
last few years, and it was so nice to go back into this world because I feel like you do that with a lot of your writing and definitely
Yeah,
in this book. Do you
yeah.
want to talk about that part of the craft? It seems like one of the standouts from the book.
Yeah, well, my hope is that and from my experience, there are still a lot of writers that are working in this kind of kaleidoscopic style. I'm reading this book by Annalise Chen right now called Clam Down. Have you heard of this?
I haven't, but I'm
It's
excited.
so great. It's so great. It's like a memoir. It's called Clam Down, a Metamorphosis. And the author in real life went through this divorce and kept getting these text messages from her mom telling her to clam down.
Awesome.
Right? Misspelling of calm down.
Mhm.
And so she's like kind of an introvert and she started like getting really interested in clams and in like embracing her desire to just kind of like clam up and remove herself from the world. And then she also starts doing all this research on clams and bivalves and thinking about literature, thinking about Kafka's Metamorphosis. And so it's got this very like digressive, expansive style that I totally love. So that was definitely like part of my agenda with this book and the way that I generally go about things. And I think Asha, I think it's partly inspired by my love and admiration for poetry. Poets kind of crack the world apart and collage it back together in ways that I've always found really fascinating and wish that I could do and don't do particularly well. But I can do a little bit of it in my literary nonfiction. And so yeah, my mind works in digressive ways, and I feel like for me, kind of mm, eh, doing these deep inward dives and outward expansions, and kind of twining those two things best represents the way that my mind works, and also, I'm writing about some pretty emotionally charged material in this book about some things that I survived as a kid. And I wanted to give readers a lot of moments of sanctuary and a lot of moments to kind of escape, literally to blast out into the cosmos. So I do, like the book has a subterranean theme. So there's a lot of exploration of caves and mines and geology, but then there's also like a lot of that. I hope it's balanced well with like these moments where I invite readers to look skyward, to look out into the sky, into the cosmos, and think about yeah, again, like kind of moments of reprieve, moments of release.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And um, you know, I don't think that there's a way that I can say this without it sounding like hilarious because of the title of your book, but like landscape is really important in your book. And
Absolutely,
one
yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I really liked about it is that it's so different from my experience. I love books that are set in places that I don't understand, and
Yeah.
I live in the Pacific Northwest and have for more than a decade, which is just bonkers to me, but I still have a hard time relating to people who love to hike and be in, like,
Hmm.
the earth. I, like, understand shorelines. I don't
Right.
understand.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to be able to enter that world without actually going there
Yeah.
through your
Yeah.
book. Do you wanna talk about landscapes or even just, like, the way that landscapes work in the 3 different parts of your book?
I'd love to. Yeah. So, I've become such a Pacific Northwesterner as well. I think I've been in Portland for going on like 18 or 19 years now, and it's definitely this is my home now, and I am more of a coastal person in a lot of ways, not climbing peaks the way that I used to, not going into exploring caves the way that I used to growing up in Colorado, and not enjoying dry weather, to be honest,
Mhm. Yeah.
uh, which is a surprise. It comes as a big surprise to me, that I actually enjoy days without the sun. But to get into your question, the book unfolds in three parts, and the first part is the section is entitled Subterranean, and it really kind of maps my a lot of my childhood experiences growing up in Western Colorado, specifically in a town called Glenwood Springs, which is about an hour away from Aspen. So it's like where all the working class people that work in Aspen live or used to live. And it's a place that is full of wonders, and so much is going on beneath the surface there. Um, there's a lot of mining activity, so mines everywhere, marble quarries. My dad used to take me to these giant clefts in the earth. There are a system of caves right above town called the Fairy Caves. There's a place called Burning Mountain, which is a place, a mountain underneath which are these coal seams that have been burning continuously as a result of a mining accident, a mining explosion for 100 years. And then, of course, we also have the world's largest hot springs pool, well, that's how they build themselves. It is a gigantic hot springs. And so these were all like really regular fixtures in my childhood, and they just fascinated me as a kid, and it was in many ways a really wonderful place to grow up. And my dad was kind of a rock hound. He gave me this book. It's like the only book I have from childhood, The Golden Guide to Rocks and Minerals. And I never really read the text much when I was a kid, but it has these wonderful painted illustrations. And we spent a lot of time in a rock shop, High Country Gems and Minerals. It's still there. And actually, I'm collaborating with him on a book event when I go to Colorado for some book touring. Um, so yeah, just like it almost compares to a place like Yellowstone. There's no geysers, but like there's just a lot of geothermal activity going on there, and also a place called the Vapor Caves, which is like these heated underground caves. And so at the same time, it's like a really kind of magical place, but it also has its problems, and the way that genders perform there, as it is throughout so much of the Western United States, throughout the United States in general, especially in the 80s when I was growing up there, could be really virulent. And so there was a pattern of that kind of around my home life, and a pattern of abuse that happened in this very hidden way, a very kind of underground way. And so I I I wanted to write about that, or I had an inkling that I might want. Like part of me really didn't want to write about it, but um, given our current cultural moment, I'm glad that I did. and it, like going really deeply using the underground subterranean theme and the actual landscape provided a kind of portal to do that. Lydia always talks about portals, and she was an important part of this book. And so, yeah, it provided this opening, and it was a way for me to like kind of write about again myself and my experiences, my emotional life, at the same time that I'm spending a lot of time like doing that kind of indirectly and describing landscapes and um, talking about geology and mining history and labor rights history and then the second part of the book is called The Heights or just Heights. And that has a very kind of purgatorial, kind of lost quality that I experienced in my 20s, coming out of my childhood with a pretty hefty load of um, dysregulation in my body, a lot of anxiety, kind of carried from some of the abuse that I survived. And the second part really deals pretty directly with like my lifelong continuing negotiation of gender and masculinity, trying to figure out how to do this, how to live in a um, male identified body, a cis body, um, in a way that is not about domination and not about just taking extraction. And So it was kind of, it was, I really loved going back and like writing about some of my own mistakes and foibles in that arena. Because I was really heavily influenced by some particular poets and books, including Robert Bly's Iron John, a book about men, where he says he makes this claim that like feminism is an okay thing, but that there's too many men in the orbit of powerful women who are becoming too soft, who are losing their ability to wield this like, Zeus power and need to embrace their kind of inner wild men. And, I am embarrassed to admit, but I just fell under the spell of that book. And especially at that time, because I was just like brimming with fear and anxiety and dysregulation. And I thought, okay, here's maybe if I can just be enough of a man, then I can transcend some of that. And and I kind of enacted all of that in the San Juans in the high alpine areas of Colorado where I thought I wanted to be a mountain like a professional mountaineer and rock climber and and just all around wilderness person and had some really wonderful experiences, absolutely, but also some real disasters. And a disastrous summer where one of our young students in a program, a wilderness program that I was leading, disappeared for some time. Um, and So that's kind of the second half, the heights, and then the third part is flashes forward decades to the time that I've been incredibly fortunate to spend in Costa Rica, Central America, where I found kind of a new way, a new, softer, more laid back way to be in conversation, in relationship with that particular landscape. And my, like falling in love with the ocean um, and birds and finding out that actually like I don't need to try to conquer the wilderness. I can just really enjoy it.
Really glad you brought up softness, which is obviously like it's in your book a lot.
Yeah.
And it's something that, I was thinking about, because I come from like the beach and had I still don't understand the difference between a mountain and not a mountain, or like a hard hike or a not
Uh,
hard hike. Like I've
yeah.
gone into the mountains and I understand that, here in the Pacific Northwest, the mountains are not full of bugs that will invade your skin. So it's like not like it is in other places, but
Hmm.
but I'm still like very much like away from this world. Like I didn't even know what some of these things were. Like, I had to, like, look them up,
Mm.
from, like, the quarry and all that stuff. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
"I don't know
yeah,
what this is." I feel like I
yeah,
learned it in 6th grade, but I just
yeah,
exited it from my mind.
yeah. A lot of the
Um,
geological
yeah,
phenomenon.
and
Yeah,
but, like, one thing that I've always had is an association with this idea that those spaces were for, like, rugged men.
yeah,
And I really liked this book because it seemed to be, like, kind of the antithesis to that.
yeah,
And also, like, just with the way that there's this in conversation with softness and texture, both in place and in yourself. Eh
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Like, I think, especially in my 20s, they were really kind of tumultuous in like my early 20s. And that grasping for that like hardness, a kind of an emotional hardness, honestly just kind of ruined me and was so awful for the people around me too. Especially the people I was in relationship with. And I never really like I think I've always been who I am, which is, a person that in some ways kind of wears his heart on his sleeve and has a kind of tender quality. But d during that time I was different and I was really I was striving, again like influenced by Robert Bly and like the whole hero's journey trope. Joseph Campbell, I was really into that at the time, and like, um, yeah, I was really striving for that, and it just made all the anxiety and fear worse, you know, and so I felt like a kind of double Confederate, right? I wasn't like the the like strong, capable wilderness guide, the rugged man that I wanted to be. And not only was I not that, but I was just like exploding with panic constantly. Um, and so I feel, I'm 51. I feel more like myself than I ever have. Anxiety disorders, living with mental health challenges, depression, those things never like, I don't know if there are things that you're ever fully cured from. But I, my relationship with my body, with myself is so much softer. And that has really helped with the anxiety, as has just being older and not having as much energy. As Lydia talks about this, right? Like, I think there's really something to it. And this is like a really kind of tender book. I guess it's part of what I do as a memoirist. I kind of like make myself pretty naked. And I have mixed feelings about doing that. And especially being a cis white male, and when, 90% of assaults and abuse are directed towards, are suffered by women and trans folks, and so like I have some really mixed feelings about that. And I'm, have a lot of privileges as a male person, as a cis person. That said, I'm pretty excited about the timing of this book, because I feel like I feel like I hope my deepest hope is that, like, again, like going into my foibles, my mistakes, my lifelong imperfect, fumbling, bumbling negotiations of masculinity, um, and gender. My hope is that there's something in that arc for some other people, of any gender expression, but especially like young men, and I don't know if they're going to read my book, but we live in a time when neo-fascism is on the rise, and this is a force that preys on especially young men's vulnerability. It's part of how they won the last election, right? Like, and but at the same time, they hate expressions of vulnerability, right? And so, yeah, again, I my deepest aspiration is that like this book might reach a couple people and show them like, look, there's different ways to go about this, and gender is not a binary thing, and there are a million masculinities, as Judith Butler would say. You know, there are a million ways to do this, and just striving to become dominant, to become hard, you know, to become um, to wield this like Zeus power and all the realms that you occupy. Like that's a road to nowhere. It's a road to misery, and it might work for a while, but eventually it's going to catch up with you.
I was thinking about it while I was reading it because, I feel like we have, at least I've been receiving the message since I was little that, you know, it's okay for boys to be soft, like that's something that like boys should start to integrate.
Yeah,
And yet that was, I remember that from maybe the early 90s. Like some of my earliest
yeah,
memories were like girl power, boys can be soft. It
yeah,
was like kind of like those things.
yeah. Which is kind of a cool idea, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And yet I still don't feel that I see very many examples of that, especially with, you know, like I feel like I see that with gay men's writing,
yeah,
but not very, very much
yeah,
elsewhere, and it's
yeah,
really nice to see it.
yeah. We have wonderful writers like Garth Greenwell, Alexander Chee, um, writers that I love. Um, and yeah, and I do identify as like a queer person, but um, um, you know, like in a hetero relationship, in a hetero
Mhm.
marriage, you know,
Yeah.
so I'm like, I don't know where it's like kind of complicated where I fall on that,
Right.
um, but yeah, and a big person that I was inspired by in this realm was Barry Lopez, um, who was, this wonderful, immensely knowledgeable, wise naturalist and writer, an Oregon local, someone who I just really admired, and like seeing the way, and he wasn't a perfect person, but like seeing the way that he performed gender and masculinity as opposed to someone like Robert Bly. um, has been really inspiring, and especially as someone who, he gave me a lot of license to write about some of the abuse issues too, because he wrote so, especially towards the end of his life, he wrote so candidly about um, living through a series of assaults, being um, caught up in the web of a pedophile's power, and then showing like how there how we can we can there's so many different things we could do with that as survivors, but one of them is to transform it into this kind of deeper care for the people around us, for the environment, for other vulnerable people having endured that, having suffered that wound. And I think that's really incredibly inspiring, and there is such a softness in doing that and admitting, like, right. I mean, he wrote this essay called Sliver of Sky in Harper's Magazine. So he's like very, very public about it. Um, and again, something I really admired, and I don't know if we read this together when we were at EOU studying together, but
Yeah.
he has this essay called Madre de Dios
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
think is so profound, and it exemplifies that transformation I was talking about, because he's kind of spinning two narratives at the same time, and the one narrative is again being caught in that net of a powerful older man and that was part of his community who was taking advantage of him, exploiting him, and then the other narratives set in the Galapagos when Barry Lopez was a young adult exploring on this scientific tour of the Galapagos, and he convinced the boat captain to go over into this dangerous area so he could use um, pocket knife to cut free, like I think it was a few dozen sea lions that were caught in this fisherman's net, and I just love that so much, like that impulse to like even sacrifice your own body and well-being and safety to like try to alleviate someone else's or another creature's suffering. I think that's so much of what he was about as a person.
It kind of counters that narrative that, like, when we're hurt, if we end up taking care of other people as a response, it's not healthy, which
Yeah,
I think is something that, like, I've always struggled with, um, because my I was sort of socialized to be a caretaker and
yeah,
have, uh, exponentially taken that task
yeah,
on, like, without
right.
even thinking about it, you know?
Yeah.
And then, as we all do, come to a place of like, do I really want to be taking care of other people? And like, what is the
Yeah.
value of taking care if you're not actually choosing to do it? But I love the
Yeah.
idea of it as sort of like a grounded choice.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Caretaking, like healing, it's very
Mhm.
complex.
Yeah.
And
Super.
something that I do very imperfectly, a lot of room for me to grow there. And it's also easy for me to talk about this as a person without kids, you know. Um, another place that privileged in certain ways, but also there's a kind of yeah, there's a bit of an ache and a loss there, um, but yeah, on the issue of softness too, something that's kind of remarkable and upsetting about the Iron John and Robert Bly's ideas is that like he borrowed them, I think, from Carl Jung, this idea that there's like we have the anima and the animus, and that like the rise of feminism has resulted in the anima archetype being too dominant. So we need to have like the animus archetype kind of rebalance the phenomenon. And it's like it's just preposterous. It's just like Carl Jung had a lot of great ideas. He was a genius, but like that is just ridiculous. And it basically takes any responsibility away from men who are oppressing women. Um, so that idea coming from Jung, coming from people like Robert Bly, maybe Robert Joseph Campbell, um, and to Robert Bly's credit, like he was really concerned about the rise of like toxic masculinity. I think part of why he wrote that book was to try to address it.
Mhm.
But what actually happened is that kind of metastasized versions of his gender essentialist prescriptions for men to become harder to um, really, really like work their way into the culture. And now you see him embraced by people like Jordan Peterson, like the Proud Boys, this idea of like being, okay, there's nothing wrong with being proud of being a man, but like thinking that you need to like embrace your essential manhood because the culture is feminizing you. Like it's a preposterous notion. And it's dangerous,
Yeah, I
you
agree.
know.
It's fascinating. It's just all of everything that's happened in the last 20 years has just been like, I'm like, is this really the life that we were that is happening? Are we here? It's
Well,
so
yeah,
weird.
it's insane. And like, it's about, there's so many different converging forces that have led to this, but I think gender is one that isn't being talked about as much right now. It has
Mhm.
been talked about on and off in regards to like the current administration but it's not a huge part of the conversation right now that at least that I'm seeing. And I think you can trace like the rise of fascism in and is the current administration, are they precisely fascist in the way that say Mussolini was? I don't know. Probably not, but there's a lot of similarities.
I wrote an article and I interviewed this trans woman named Amethysta Herrick, and she is, a scientist, and she has this whole theory about gender dysphoria. And she says something to the effect of, that she believes everybody experiences gender dysphoria, but like we just don't really talk
Hmm.
about it with boys. Like
Yeah.
she gave me the example of like the, baseball dugout. It's like
Mm.
if you don't get to go play, like you're stuck in the dugout. I don't
Mm.
really understand baseball.
Mm.
I don't like I've been to one baseball game in my
Mm-hmm.
life. But, like, so I'm probably saying this all wrong, but then you're not like performing the way that you would might expect yourself to be. And so you're
Yeah.
experiencing some kind of dysphoria, and there's all different layers of
Yeah.
that, and some of the stuff in your book,
That's
like the hard stuff that happened to you, it's like all
yeah.
that stuff like is it imbues us with feeling like we're failing as a member of our archetype or gender.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. I think, yeah, I did kind of, especially when during I mentioned the disappearance of um, the one of our students in our wilderness program, and yeah, I experienced that acutely, especially being surrounded by all these very capable men. Of like, oh, I've failed on so many levels. And if only Robert Bly could see me now, you know. Um, so and also was thinking about like the the genesis of a program like Outward Bound. It was originated by this guy Kurt Hahn, who stood up to the Nazis in Germany, but then like had these very rigid ideas about masculinity himself, and all these places where men and young boys especially were deficient. And so Outward Bound was originally devised as a way of like uh, improving young men's fortitude and persistence and physical ability, and because these are all these places that they were apparently deficient. So yeah, wild,
Mhm.
wild.
Yeah, I want to talk about craft in your book
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
I mean, so you did like one of my favorite things where like every chapter is a little bit different than the
yeah,
chapter before and after
yeah,
it. And
yeah,
so I wondered if you want to talk about that. And also, like, two questions that have been coming up with some of my students and people that I've been in writing groups with lately were just on my mind while I was reading. And one of
yeah,
them was like, why would you break up a chapter into anything? Like,
mm,
this is something that people have been asking me lately. And I feel like
yeah,
it's like a contentious conversation. Though I don't really
yeah,
I've always just taken it as like, "Oh, you can do whatever you want with that,
yeah,
but
yeah.
why not?" But I wonder
Okay,
if you have anything to say about that.
totally. Yeah, I love talking about like craft, and especially in the arena of memoir and personal essay. I think it goes again back to my admiration for poets, and I have this like really I have some distinct memories of being in my MFA program back in the ice ages, and like yeah, this was she's 20 years ago, so a long time ago. But was friends with a lot of poets, and I used to look at their their like MFA thesis manuscripts, and they were just the way they looked on the page was fascinating to me. The way that they would, one poem would be in couplets, and then the next poem would be like a block of text, and then the next poem would be, it would be like almost like a kind of constellation of words all over the page. And that fascinated me, and I felt this sense of jealousy, like, why can't we just we have to consign ourselves to, um or resign ourselves to just these blocks of our walls of words on the page, which is fine, like, that really works for some people, and, but I think it's my kinda wannabe poetness that enjoys playing with words and moving words around on the page and playing with sentences, and but also like playing with the format. And the writing that I love all kinds of writing. I can read the heck out of like um Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea Quartet, where it's just like, you know she wasn't doing anything fancy with formatting, um, necessarily. Or even like Game of Thrones, like terrible. The language is awful. Um, it's just blocks and blocks of text, but I'm like, I can appreciate that. But for me personally, like I what I love the most in literature and writing and contemporary literature is work that is compressed, has this kind of compressed quality to it, a kind of poetic compression, and that is doing interesting things in terms of formatting. The first thing I do when I pick up a book on the shelf is flip through to see, like, all right, is there any is this is it just walls of text, or is there anything interesting going on in terms of formatting in this, especially if it's like nonfiction, or but also
Mhm.
fiction, and like, so two of my absolute favorite books are one of my favorite books is like The Department of Speculation by Ginny O'Feel. I'm crazy about that book, and it's one of the best reading experiences I've ever had, um, because it could be it could be billed as a collection of poetry, but it's a memoir, and the writing is like so super condensed. Um, and then and then like, I think of Rebecca Solnit, The Far Away Nearby, like really interesting play on the page. So many writers doing interesting things.
Crystal Cavern. After my parents' divorce in the early 80s, my mother spent a year living in Denver, where she earned her master's degree in nursing. She rented a room from an amiable schoolteacher, the first fully out lesbian I ever encountered, who showed me that queerness does not equal ridicule or exile as it seemed to back in Glenwood Springs. I felt safe when visiting my mother and her in the city and on the weekends when my mom made the 3-hour drive home. But I spent most of that year at my father's house. He often fell into sour moods during this era of his single parenthood. Alcohol sometimes exacerbated his gruffness. Other times, my own misbehavior and hypersensitivity tested his patience. Then there was his neighbor's house where the teenage brothers lived, always looming. It never even occurred to me to tell my mother what went on over there, though her vocation involved protecting the vulnerable. One bright, cold Saturday, she drove me to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science to visit the Gems and Minerals exhibit. Colorado was founded on mining, a placard informed us as we entered the building. I remember Tom's Baby, an 8-pound nugget of crystallized gold unearthed near Breckenridge in 1887. In a darkened room, fluorescent mineral specimens transformed into exotic shades of neon green, purple, and red under a push-button operated ultraviolet light bulb. Nearby, encased in a large cubbyhole behind thick glass, an installation called the Grotto contained a fully preserved cavern of crystals imported from Mexico's Naica cave. The interior was an iridescent, billowy cloudscape, a confectionery wonderland of stalactites and stalagmites like puffs of sponge sugar or tufts of glittery wool. It seemed to go on forever, the cavern growing dark as it curved to the right, creating the illusion of infinite depth. I wanted to crawl inside and curl up in the back corner, make my home inside its soft, scintillating world. I imagined I could live safely in that splendor, the crystals emanating a protective force field, thick glass preventing any unwanted hands from reaching inside.